What's up, everyone? Have you been told in a fairy tale that goodness always prevails? Or maybe you watch these cowboy western type of things, and it's always the good guys defeating the bad guys. And a lot of people think that's the way it should be. But today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at will good conquer evil, especially in the world as it is today. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy? You know, now you mentioned this topic, I was just thinking, I listened to a podcast that was on the history of comic books. And I guess like in the 30s, they used to be like really graphic and violent, whatever. And there was a lot of hubbub because they were selling like 100 million copies a month or whatever. So they're really popular. And they ended up going to Congress and all this stuff happened. But anyway, they ended up making a code of conduct, one of which was that good always had to triumph over evil. And you had to be able to distinguish the good guys and bad guys very clearly. You couldn't have any like amorality type stuff. And you
Uh-huh.
saw that that's no longer the case anymore. They've gotten rid of those restrictions, but see that throughout, right? If you think of like any superhero comic book stuff like that, it's very easy to tell, and you know they're always going to win, which is kind of
Mhm.
interesting that we had to like embed that in.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And it's a curious topic because nowadays there's a whole bunch of like sketchy stuff that goes on, like
All the
scammers
time,
doing your phone and email nonstop, people
constantly.
stealing from each other, like all this stuff that's questionable ethically, morally, whatever, however you want to look at it.
Well, I think the only thing, I mean, I think, well, at least from my perspective, is the major problem. We made everything about money, and everything's about the end, not how you go about getting it. So the faster you can do it is the better. And if you do it really
Mhm.
fast, no one cares, right? How many people you screw over, how many people I mean, look at like, that's what happened in like the 80s with the business schools, right? It was just all cut costs, screw everybody over, enrich the executives, and that was it, and
Yep.
shareholders. So,
Yeah, and it
yeah,
worked. Huzzah.
yeah, huzzah, here we are.
Yeah.
Welcome to
Well,
2025.
it's interesting. I was actually talking about this with someone this week about how like crime kind of has gone on a spree. Oh, this is why. Because
Oh,
I actually recently uh have someone broke into a locker that I use and stole some credit cards that I had,
okay.
which they left the money behind. They left the phone and the ear things behind, but they stole the credit cards, which doesn't particularly make sense to me because credit
No,
cards
because
are easy to cancel.
you can cancel them
But
instantly, and you won't get charged
I
for anything that they maliciously charge.
I
So
know.
really, the cash made a lot more sense.
Yeah, so it really confused me, but I was talking with someone about this and I was like, it's crazy because like nowadays it's almost like crime pays. Like from like cartoons they're like crime doesn't pay.
Yeah.
But like nowadays it almost pays because most other jobs you really have to work too hard to barely scrape by. So it's almost like crime makes sense because the executives are making a killing, but everybody else is barely making ends meet, working like a dog, and it's just like, hey, if I have to do this shady thing to get ahead so that I can feed my family or so I can buy that thing that everybody else on Instagram has. Well, why not?
Well, look at the reaction when that executive from the medical insurance company got killed. People didn't care, and they didn't care for a reason because his decisions were killing people all the
Yeah,
time. And it's like,
yeah.
so I think you look around us, look at Trump was joking about not paying taxes, how that made him a good businessman. Like, all you see is criminality everywhere, enriching people. So, it makes sense. And like you said too, the regular work sucks anymore. You don't get paid enough to live. You don't get any respect. There's no dignity in it. So
I tell you, no
yeah,
respect.
no respect at all. No one will
Thanks,
get
Rodney
that.
Dangerfield.
But it's the truth though. And I think part of it is I think because at least good and evil are totally subjective relative concepts. They have no
That's
true
yeah.
definition. They're only defined by communities, by societies, right? I mean,
And they're
morality,
kind of defined by the other. Like bad exists
yeah.
because there's good. It's like the shadow of good is
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. I mean, in reality, everything's degrees, and in
Mhm.
reality, it's only our actions that are good or bad, and they're only good or bad relative to what we're doing, right? So it's like, if you really think about it, good and evil requires some community standards. And I think what we've seen in the past, like at least I would say 15 years, if not more, is just a collapse of any sense of like ethic or standard that everyone lives by. It's funny. I was reading a report, like if you go back to like I think it was like after World War II, like the 50s and stuff, in company reports, like their annual reports, they would brag about how much taxes they paid. because it was like, and like how much they were paying their employees and stuff, because it was like a moral point, right? Like where like they were good executives, they were running a good company, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And all that's gone away. And I think with that, though, we've seen the collapse of like the moral sense, broadly speaking.
Well, plus I think we've kind of incentivized crime. Like I'm not exactly sure of all the laws because I don't pay attention too much attention to it, but they like reduce the amount that like you can steal without going to prison, something like that. They
Yeah.
increase the amount of money that you can steal without going to prison. And also like prisons are just getting too cushy in America. It's like a luxury resort where you don't have to pay for anything. And sure
Well, they're
you get beat
wildly
up and raped and
overcrowded.
all of that stuff,
They're
but like
wildly overcrowded too.
but for a lot of people, it's like better there than where they would normally live outside of prison. And it's like there's no incentive not to go to prison. Like I've heard about countries like Japan and places like that. Like if you get arrested, you go to jail. It is not comfortable, and you don't know if you're ever going to get out. Like when stuff like that happens, yeah, sure, the occasional person has to suffer a long time, but most other people don't want to go to jail. So they stop
Well, to
doing
be
stuff
fair,
that's yeah,
tons of innocent people have suffered in our. It's not like our system's good at it
yeah.
by any stretch. I don't think that that's anything to worry about. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, yeah, that is the issue. Is like we, how much do we punish these things? How do we punish them? Are we actually looking at reform? Because I think that's the other side of it too, that we don't really do any reform. We just throw people in there and give them, it's like kind of ridiculous. But I would also argue too, the other problem is that depending on how much money you have, crime is very different in how it's treated too. And the punishments are very different. Like look
Mhm.
at Trump. He just got convicted of 34 things and nothing happened, right? Because
Yeah.
he's popular and because he has money.
Well, it's the golden rule.
Yeah. He
He
was
who
made
has
to
the
gold,
gold makes
literally.
the rules.
Yeah, well, they used to say
Yeah.
that like it was like what was it? Privilege meant like, you had different laws applied to you basically, which
Hmm.
is really what it is. I mean, we've seen like, they've gotten rid of so many regulations that watch these things. They've destroyed like our ability to track. So I think, yeah, we're in a weird time where it's like very, I would say almost like not individualistic, but just yeah, kind of criminal, where we favor scams and crime and get rich quick schemes and ripping people off.
Or here's the other thing. Is it just that it's so transparent nowadays? Like we have everybody has this like soapbox basically, and it just spreads like wildfire. Like you remember when the drones were coming out, and
Yes.
then everybody's like 2025 is
And
the year
then
of
nobody
aliens and
talked to
stuff
him.
like that.
They talked
Yeah,
about him
no,
anymore.
and now it's gone because they're talking about the next thing. But like I was so like Sweeney Todd, the musical, the guy's selling some hair tonic and it's like piss and ink, like,
Yeah.
snake oil. And like back in the day, they had a ton of snake oil salesmen because the worst that would happen is people would find out in the town and then he'd just go to the next town down
You get
and
run
nobody
out of
would
town,
know.
literally. Yeah.
But like here, something happens in the smallest corner of the world and everybody hears about it.
I think, well, maybe
Maybe.
that is it. I mean, we are more, look, the news reports on bad things. They don't report good things because bad things get more eyes, right?
Hmm.
So, when we see the news around the world, we don't see like people helping each other out or charitable organizations doing good things. All we see is crime, terrorism, people getting murdered, you know, stuff like that happening. So it also makes it seem like the world's saturated with it. It's funny, actually, I remember it was this is not that long ago. There was some it must have been like maybe it was like 2020 or whatever, but there's some rioting in some cities. But the way the news was reporting it in the US, they kept showing the same clips, but a lot. So it made it look like it was happening, like it made it look
All
like
over.
every city this was happening, when in reality, dude, it was like Seattle, I think, was having a problem or something. But like
Hmm.
they can very easily make things look like they're like way worse than they are because of that. And I think that's also like a huge problem.
Like so we're from the East Coast, and when there were the wildfires in California,
Yeah.
my friends from internationally were calling me to be like, "Oh my gosh, are you all right?" And it's like, yeah, that's like 6 hours by plane. It's like what over there?
Yeah, but the way they
Yeah,
report it, it seems like it's
yeah,
everywhere because it's just all
yeah.
you see. And I think that is like I always wondered that too. Like how much is like our media, because it all focuses on the same thing, like making us think that the world's way worse than it is. You know,
Hmm.
maybe by
Yeah.
margins, yeah.
So brings us back to the original question: will good conquer evil? Does it even should it even conquer evil? Is it logically possible for good to conquer evil?
I don't know. That's a tough question, right? I mean, like. ideally, I think we could get to a place
But
where like,
don't you want good to conquer evil? Isn't
well,
that
yeah.
like the way that it should be in
Well,
like all these fairy
I think
tales
we
and
all
stuff?
want a world where people are treated fairly, with respect, dignity, all that, where everybody can get what they need. But at the
Mhm.
same time, there's also a lot of people are selfish, countries are selfish, So I think it's like it is hard to say, and there's always going to probably be some, but will it win out? I mean, time will tell, right? I think we'll either
Yeah.
burn this thing to the ground, or maybe
Hmm.
something good will happen. It's also
Yeah.
perspective too, right? It's also whoever kind of wins.
Yeah, and there are always those people who like want to work on the bad side, you know?
Yeah. Well,
They're
it's also like
they
it
like
is.
idolize criminals and mafia and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
that's what they want to grow. They want to be Scarface, and that's how they live.
But there's also people who rightly so. I think you could also argue that the government doesn't really help people and it's crooked and there's all kinds of problems. So working against it also isn't necessarily always a bad thing, depending on what you do, obviously. I'm not idolizing any people that does that kind of crime.
Mhm.
But then on the
Yeah,
other hand, too, you also have like it's funny too, because like wars and stuff, both sides think they're good, right? It's a matter of
yeah.
perspective. It would be absurd to
Hmm.
think you were doing evil.
And religions, all of them think that they're good and everyone
Yeah,
else is evil. Yeah,
yeah. Irrespective of what they actually do to people.
yeah. I know,
So
right?
I think it is funny. It's very like there's this like self-righteous high horse, like my side's always good, and everybody else that's against me is evil, right? And I think that's part
Yeah.
of the problem is we don't have perspective on it.
And when I do something wrong, it was situational. But when somebody
Yeah,
else does it,
accident.
it's their character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was situational or it was because of external events and nothing to do with
Yeah.
me. I'm
Yeah.
perfect.
All right. Well, I think that about answers that one. Will good conquer evil? Could it conquer evil? All of that fun stuff. I just thought that would be an interesting one because
It
here's the
is.
reason why the idea came up. So I was watching Wicked, the movie, for the fourth time. It's yeah,
Wait, is it
it's been
good?
oh I've loved it. I
You're
think it's
talking about the one
awesome.
that's based on the musical, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I've it has Ariana Grande in it, I think.
oh, wow.
And yeah, I think it's phenomenal. Like great musical, great music. And so I've been enjoying it. And in one of the songs it was talking about how good conquers evil. And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting topic."
Well, it is interesting that in all of our fantasy and all of our literature and stuff, it always does, which is really interesting too. It's rare to find books or like movies where like truly the bad people actually win. Oh, but or if they do, you sympathize with them, so you start to see them as good anyway, which is also the funny
Mhm.
thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just doesn't feel good when they win. Yeah. But anyways, that's all.
Yeah,
So, anyways, that's all for this episode. Will good conquer evil? This is the Existential Stoic podcast. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, we're always looking for new ideas, and we would love to know what philosophical or self-help questions might be puzzling you, and you would like our input. So, if you do have any questions, concerns, comments, you can either post down in the comments on YouTube, or you can send us an email in the show notes down below wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, though. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
later, Rainy.